Welcome back to Guiding Tides. This is Christian Smith. Tonight we have a pretty interesting topic. We're going to dive a little bit deeper on something that we may all know, or at least we've heard of. Going to pass it off to Mahesh. Before I do, though, there's been a question come up a few times. It's roughly 45 minutes to do my hair. With that being said, Mahesh, take us off.
Oh my God, yeah, kid uses crazy glue instead of shampoo. Hey guys, hope everyone's doing well. We're talking about different topics that we wanted to connect with the audience, and Jeff came up with a brilliant idea of something I hope you guys could relate to. It used to be called dysthymia, or being dystemic, and people refer to it now as persistent depressive disorder. What that means is that someone who has depression, according to the DSM book, when we actually give someone a classification, if you're a therapist and you classify somebody with a disorder, they have to meet certain criteria. The criteria for this disorder is that they have to have it for 2 years, which I personally struggle with, because what if you have it for a year and a half? You don't have it? I don't know. But getting back to the topic, so when we're looking at persistent depressive disorder, I want to call it PDD from now on so I don't mess it up. It's the ability to still function with what you have to do. You still go to work, you're still a parent, you're still a partner, and you go through the day's events and you're functioning, but you're dealing with your depression. So according to the DSM, it's a lower level of depression where you're not afraid to leave your house, you're not completely falling apart, crying at home, and unable to interact with other people, such as major depressive disorder.
So you're talking about my 30s, basically.
I'm talking about, I think, most anybody in society today, and I'm glad you brought that up, because at some level, we hit our lows, right? And we're struggling. And that's my big thing about this labeling of like, well, you have to have it for 2 years. Says who? If it's persistent and it's constantly, this weight around your neck that you have to carry around while you're meeting your obligations as a human being, as a parent, as a member of society, whatever your role is, it gets to a point where you just accept it. And a lot of people accept their state of depression as, well, this is who I am. This is my life. That's my lot in life.
I like to call it my imaginary friend.
Really?
Yeah. When I was younger. No, but when I was younger, like, you know how depression comes and goes?
Yeah.
It's like an imaginary friend. When you get into a low and you're in that low.
There he is. There's your
friend.
Yep.
It's like a family member you don't want to see and they keep showing up.
Exactly.
Uncle Charlie, get out of here.
Yeah, I got you. Right. It's that monster under your bed, But some people could feel it coming on, and they can see the warning signs.
Oh, 100%.
And good for them, because they're aware.
Mm-hmm.
They see it coming on with their interactions with people. They see it coming on because they're less tolerable at work of your colleagues that are doing stupid things, where other days you're more tolerable of things that frustrate you at work or at home with your kids, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
You're more snappy.
Yep.
And they could see those warning signs and be like, okay, it's coming in that wave, and now I have to kick into strategies on how I deal with it. And I'll get to that in a second. I'll get to that later. But let's first define what this is. So persistent depressive disorder, PDD. I think most of us deal with this on a regular basis. Maybe 2 years or more, sure. Okay, if you want to fit that category. But I think there are periods of life where it comes in and out of our lives where we're struggling with it, and we can get out of it. It doesn't have to be a crisis moment. Most people think that, well, if a crisis happens, I get depressed or I feel anxious, and I'm struggling through this period of my life because, I'm out of a job, or I just got divorced, or I'm struggling with my substance abuse. And then you hit a point where like, okay, I got this under control. I'm feeling better. And you expect, to be this joyful person, right? And then you realize, yeah, I'm not that joyful person. I'm still dealing with feeling like crap. I'm still dealing with my depression. I'm still not motivated. And just getting up in the morning and doing what I need to do to get in my car to get to work, it's like
That's a hassle.
It's like a triathlon.
Yeah.
For people who have to suffer through this, But I think it varies from degree to degree. Like your depression in our society today, and I'm looking at American society, right? I'm looking at like middle class, upper middle class society. We might be upset because, we're not driving a BMW. I'm only driving.
First world problems.
Yeah, exactly. Champagne problems.
So it sounds like this is more like a occasional thing similar to that of a sickness, right? It's not a disease.
It's classified as a disorder, right? And I keep circling back to that. It's like, is this a disorder or is this self-constructed?
The reason I ask that is because at the facility I'm currently in, somebody said something that made a lot of sense to me in regards to my panic and my anxiety. That's something I'm diagnosed with. I'm always going to have that. But there's certain periods where it's an illness. You have to, just like when you're sick with the cold or whatever, like you take something, you do something for it. So that's what I'm doing right now for it to kind of subside and for me to be better.
Right.
That's kind of what I'm picking up with this. It's, yeah, you're diagnosed with it, but it's like a sickness that periodically happens.
Right. For some people, right?
That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah. But it's so tailor-made depending on your psyche.
So it can be 2 years, it could be 20 years in that same...
Yeah. Some people can just live in a state of depression for their entire lives, and they accept it. And what's interesting about looking at this issue is that you don't have to accept it. But if you're willing to, as we said in prior episodes, looking at fight or flight, if you're willing to take that challenge on and reevaluate your life, what does it take for you to say, I'm not going to put up with this anymore in my life. I'm sick and tired of feeling depressed. I'm sick and tired of not liking myself. I'm sick and tired of people not liking me.
This brings me to a huge problem that I don't know, torture myself is a strong word, but, I always get backed into this corner professionally where it's like the person sitting on the other table from me needs to feel hope, needs to feel, like this course of treatment's going to work for them. They're depressed, they're anxious, they're, coming out of the worst period of their life. For this type of work, for clinical therapy to take a hold in someone, it really, I guess, works the best if they believe they're worth it, right? And we've seen such a big campaign and kind of like positive mental health and inspirational stuff of like, you're worth it. You got to believe you're worth it. Right. You matter. You're important. And
I like the you matter.
I don't know about you guys, but like, I didn't feel that way about myself showing up to treatment.
Oh, absolutely not.
No, I didn't feel that this time around. I didn't feel it for 7 months. God forbid I put my hand up in a 12-step meeting or spoke in any type of group format. Anything that came out of my mouth wasn't positive, and it certainly wasn't. I wasn't speaking any positivity about myself, about what I had accomplished in life, and my scorecard read 0. And thinking about the future. Despair is just a word that appears. And how do we get people to realize they're worth it? How do we get people through this venue or through other venues, like to connect with that in that early stage of treatment or trying to confront their issues and fight it?
I think that ties into a very impactful thing that we've talked about a lot here, and that's journaling. I understand. I've been in that same spot. Excuse me. You're at the bottom of the barrel. You're done. There's nothing to you. You're just deflated. I often contribute the mental image of depression to that of, remember early 2000s, the don't smoke weed commercials, and the person was deflated. Like that's how I feel.
Yeah.
Right. Just melted into a couch. And it's so hard to remember those quotes and that cool thing that got you fired up when you were in a good mood. Personally, now I can do that. Now I don't mind going into the dark, into depressive states, because I'm comfortable there. It's fucked up to say, but I'm comfortable there. I don't like, let me rephrase that. I'm familiar with the territory. I'm not comfortable. I get uncomfortable when I'm in that state, but I'm familiar with the lay of the land. Now I know what to do. Now I know where the flashlight is in the dark. I can get to it quicker.
Yeah.
I can tap back in. So my point with the journaling, because I've done this, on those days where it's sunny, it's 75, it's a great day, just everything went as it should, I'll write myself a letter or something, a text message, and I go back to it in those times. And sometimes I almost read it as if I did not write it, but I tap back into that and I'm like, wow. I'm like, okay, I can get back to that.
Yeah, how do I get back to that?
That dude was cool. I want to, yeah. So that's something I can offer up as a strategy.
I mean, when I journal, it's great. And especially in those depressive states, it really helps getting your thoughts out and stuff like that. But being able to go back and read your journals from where you were, like however long ago, in a depressive state, and when you're not in a depressive state and you get to read it, it's amazing.
So you're saying, like, let's say right now I'm super depressed. I see no hope. I'm helpless, hopeless.
Grab a journal and grab your journal that you've written.
Right about that.
And let's be clear, like a single subject notebook with like little pieces of paper falling out of the
Oh, yeah.
Like you can journal on anything. You can journal on printer paper, scrap paper,
Yep.
anything. You don't need to go out and buy a fancy little journal with a thing to slide your pen in and a little strap to go over it. Like,
But that just makes it more fun.
Sure, yeah. Well, let's just say hypothetically there was a journal with the Guiding Tides logo on it. It had the strap and the pen. I would love for you to buy it.
yeah, season 3 coming soon.
Yep. But so, Jess, that's kind of like a challenge thought or like reversal on what I said. You're in a good place, write that, reread, but do it on the flip. That's a good idea. Because when you're jacked up, you can write how you feel, read it later, or even write to your future self for that sunny 75 day. Like, dear future me, and you're reading it as if, and you're like, I'm hurting right now. I'm struggling. That's an interesting concept.
Yep.
Yeah, these are great strategies, and there are other ones I want to get into. But I want to bring it back to how do we get there in the first place? You know, like this specific level of depression where you're a functioning person, but you're still dealing with depression, right? Because I think it gets to a point, from what I've read, that you even forget you have this depression. You're just in this state on a regular basis that you just accept your life as it is. You accept yourself as a loser. You look at yourself as this loser, and you're like, well, that's who I am. You know, any ambition in you to move forward in life, there's no vision. You know, you're used to being treated like crap with your family members. You're used to being treated like crap at work, and you just accept it, you know, because that's my lot in life. That's who I am. I'm that guy. I'm Eeyore, you know, out of Winnie the Pooh, right?
You're not worth it.
Yeah. And people accept that, you know, and they don't label it as a mental health issue. But once you are able to look at it through that lens of, this is a mental health disorder. There's an issue that I need to deal with, and I can change it. When do you get to the point where you start trying it out? I don't know. Like we've mentioned this in the past, that you have to find that spark. You have to decide, you know, when do you say to yourself, when do you look at yourself in the mirror and say, enough of this?
Can I offer something a little bit deeper there?
Yeah.
So I'm offering this because I did it. Nobody told me to. I didn't read about it online. I just happened to fall into it naturally the other night. I realized something was off with me, and I felt as though I was unaligned. What I mean by that, without sounding crazy, and I'll keep this as short as I can, I have all these versions or modes within me. I got the warrior, I got the visionary, I got the scared child. I have all these modes, right? I'll call them modes. So I kind of pulled like a round table in my war room. That's, you know, all my voices in my head. Not to sound like that, but
I call mine demons in my head.
yeah, so I invite
Call mine the itty bitty shitty
But so
committee.
mentally, I kind of pulled all my versions of myself to the table.
Right.
And I'm like, hey, you know, I let each one speak. Certain ones conflicted, but then I kind of came out the other end with a calmer sense of self. I developed a little mantra for myself, which is, if it's meant to be, it's meant for me. And that's something every one of my modes, the scared child, the the stoic, the warrior, the visionary, the cynic, they can all repeat in those times when I start to fall in like a depressive state. I'm not saying that people are in a depressive state because they're unaligned. Nobody has to share my views on that. But I felt myself slipping into a depressive state. Struggling to get in the shower, and I love showers and my hair, obviously we all that. And it wasn't enjoyable for me. And I'm like,
Yep.
This sucks. I would wake up, and this is just the past week. I wake up, the kids get going, and I can't wait for bedtime already. And then they go to bed, and I feel so guilty. Did I give them enough time? They go to bed, and I miss them. So I'm like, all right, it was about 2, 3 in the morning. I was sitting in my living room, and that idea came into my mind, and I just want to offer that up to you guys for thought and everybody.
Christian, I can definitely relate to that for sure. Because, I mean, as I've said before in earlier episodes, getting up and wishing to go to bed is real.
It's real. Yeah.
It's real.
For me, depression always begins with like losing a purpose, losing my way, find myself living in a career, in a job, in a relationship, in an apartment, in all of these settings and places that I feel like I don't belong in. I'm not contributing to, I'm not making any kind of impact. And life just becomes humdrum and mundane. And I'm really good at hiding out and spending years of my life in that kind of shape historically.
But I've always masked mine well.
So I didn't know I didn't know I was masked. Like I didn't know I was depressed. I didn't know I had like these issues, and I didn't know I was masking. What like has
Just
been
accepted life as it was.
as you were saying.
That's my point. Yeah, right.
Business as usual.
The revolutionary change for me didn't come until I really surrendered and accepted treatment. And that didn't happen until I had the realization that like my life is pointless. Like, what am I doing? I'm, just a bear to be around, restless, irritable, discontent, whether I'm consuming substances or not consuming substances, because early on, late teenage years, I was confronted with substance use disorder, and you had to join a 12-step fellowship and made the firm resolution as a 17-year-old, I can't drink alcohol. When I drink alcohol, A, B, and C happens. And I've come back, at 22, at 31, and tried the drink experiment again, and I just can't. But then what do I do? What do I do about my depression? What do I do about my anxiety? I might be worse off without substances to help mask, to make me feel a little bit better. So you gotta find your strength. You gotta find what helps you see things as they really are, because if you don't, you're just gonna stay stuck.
Stuck is a good way to put it.
Yeah, quicksand.
Yeah.
It's kind of like those little sticky traps for the mice. So I feel like.
Yeah.
Kind of like quicksand or getting hit with a hammer when you're stuck on that trap, right?
Imagine.
Yeah.
That would be terrible. I couldn't imagine doing that. That's just horrible. Jumping back to depression. So when you're in that state of mind and you're accepting it as your life, right? I find this kind of fascinating culturally, because Western society, therapy is the thing to do, is the avenue to choose to address your mental health. And
that's a result of us kind of going in the direction of Freud, right?
I think more so, Freud was more dream-oriented child development, then you had Erickson with the foundation. So I think it's more Erickson. You ever see that pyramid? So this is a guy named Erickson, and he talked about this pyramid of development, and I forget the actual term, but like your foundation is having housing, having food, having safety, security, first level. You have to establish that. Once you have that, you can move up to education, meaning of life, philosophy, as you're moving up. And then you, at the pinnacle, at the top of the pyramid, you start looking at, well, who am I as a person? How can I evolve to be a better person? That's a goddamn privilege. Because if you think globally, there are a lot of people that don't know if they're going to get food that night or that day, or where they're going to sleep that night. They're struggling.
Yeah.
So for them to get into this existential conversation about like, oh, who am I really? Like, dude, where's my dinner? Have I seen my family? When's the last time I saw my parents? And you're like 8 years old and you're looking around.
Yeah.
So therapy is a privilege, and I think when we get to the point of like addressing our depression, it's very cultural. I got it. It's just sitting in me, and I got to bring it up, and I bring it up because growing up, being raised as an Indian, this concept of like going to therapy, not looked upon very favorably.
Same in the Portuguese culture.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, it was like it had to be on the hush hush if you were going to therapy.
Yeah.
With the Irish, were actually born, and there's a ceremony where given a therapist at birth.
Oh man.
But I work right now with a lot of Indian students that are struggling with their anxiety and depression because they're taking all these AP classes and they're being pushed to fit this mold that they have to go to Harvard and they have to be a doctor. Okay, God forbid if you're not going to be a doctor, maybe you could be an engineer. And they stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning every night doing their homework, making sure that they're hitting the mark, and they're killing themselves. And I've had students that have had to be hospitalized, that have hurt themselves, they're cutting themselves, they have eating disorders.
That's awful.
And I had a conversation recently with a parent explaining to them, listen, your kid is suffering, from major depression.
Yeah.
They're hurting themselves. They don't want to live. They need to be taken to crisis for an evaluation. Her question to me was, when did she come to you and tell you this? And I said, well, it was during her English class. So she missed English class? God's honest truth. So that was her focus. And from that, it went to, well, if she is hospitalized, can she still take her finals? Will this affect her grades?
I would have paused and said, this is exactly why she
is the way that she is.
Yeah.
I said
no support.
I said it in a more eloquent way, so yeah, I had to deliver it and I had to let her know, like, these are issues that she needs to address, in counseling, because this is what's causing her, to have the struggle. And the mother's being honest. She's like, but why? But why? What is she struggling with? That's what she needs to do, and she's being dead honest,
That's just who she is.
Yeah, but the construct of depression
isn't practical to
certain
normal people, to people that don't experience it.
Yeah, I just think that, we need to, it's not universal.
Right.
So we could look at ourselves that we have the luxury of saying we're depressed, because we're not happy, but we're not happy because, I don't feel special. Yeah. But I got a house, I'm paying my mortgage, I got a job, I'm not an addict, but I do depend on, substances as a crutch to deal with the depression, but you're still functioning in this level of depression that we're talking about.
Yep.
Right?
How much does like the biochemical of like dopamine and, all that stuff, how much does that play into PDD versus major depressive? Yeah.
It depends. It depends on the person.
It's obvious in major depressive. It's like that person's chemically imbalanced, like there's something going on there. And it may not be environmental. It may not be the job, the relationship. It may not be any of that stuff. You just may be, you hit a genetic lottery and your chemical balance is.
I am in that genetic lottery.
Yeah.
And I.
So there are people that have the genetic disposition for depression, right? Along with environmental factors that are socioeconomic, and because of the constructs of society, if you happen to be, a black kid in an all-white neighborhood, growing up a lot of crap, you're going to deal with more than than the white kid next to you, you know? So it depends on the situations. So sometimes there's a marriage of the genetics along with environmental. Sometimes it depends on the person, but it also depends on how you define depression. You know, like you might define depression as I worked all week and I got nothing to do this weekend. I'm bored and I'm so depressed that I'm bored. And you might believe that, right? And I'm like, you have a weekend? I got 3 jobs, bro.
But that doesn't take away. I'm going to challenge you. That doesn't take away from the fact that they still feel like shit, though, and
Right.
it's real.
So
to them,
right? No, you're right, and I agree with you. You know, but that's a construct.
Right.
You know, I'm constructing my depression, but I'm also the key to my depression.
Yeah.
You know, so when we go back to journaling and we go back to strategy of how to address it, we have to create something that we're going to connect with. Like you guys, you're into journaling.
Yes.
You know, I don't think I can do that. You know,
Why?
I don't know. It's just me. But I like to put on music. I'll put on my 80s metal and I'll just like dive into a Pink Floyd album, or I'll just dive into a Rush album, and I'll be pissed if somebody walks in and interrupts me when I have my headphones on.
brick wall.
You must.
You know,
Yeah.
you know, that's my go-to. My therapy is my music.
Yeah.
You know, so I love my riding to work because my ride is about 45 minutes. You know,
I love my rides to work too. I blame
yeah,
music.
it's just me, and there's like Iron Maiden screaming out of my car, you know, and I'm bashing that steering wheel as hard as I can. I'm into it. I'm in my own little world, and I connect with it. That helps me.
Yeah.
Right. So that puts me in a good mood. Sometimes on the way home, I'll put on like a comedy thing on Spotify. You know, I'll put on like old Robin Williams, and I'll just
I love Robin Williams.
I'll just crack myself up.
George Carlin.
You know, right? George Carlin.
Change the mood a little bit.
Yeah, but I'm
could always-
actively choosing. I'm actually saying to myself, "Man, this was a tough day.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do about it?" You know, so you know, we have to, with any of these issues that we talked about with anxiety, you know, and panic disorders. In the moment, yeah, it's scary as hell. But when we can stop that spinning spiral, and we're able to assess ourselves in that moment and say, I got to do something about this.
Well, you have to make that decision. It's not an easy decision to make, but it's only a decision you can make.
Yeah.
I have things like that as well when I'm in the car. If I'm really just not in a good place, I'll put on my favorite mental health podcast, Padding Tides.
Yeah.
But no, seriously,
Padding Tides.
you know, it's hard to figure out what your thing is, but you got to figure it out. You
Yeah.
can't just keep staying down. Maybe that's just me with a rougher approach to shit, but you got to get creative. Try. When I was going through my shit, when I was really depressed, I got into painting. It wasn't that cool. It was a fucking color by number, but I happened to pick the expert level, and that was a year ago. I got about that much of it done. It's funny. Sometimes it kind of helps me, but then I end up getting pissed off because I'm a perfectionist. If I see the number coming through the color, I'm like,
Yeah.
I rip this whole thing up. I was doing it the other night, and my buddy called me, and I consider him a strong guy. Works in the law enforcement field, doing some pretty cool shit. And he called me. He's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I was like, "I'm just," and he's like, "Dude, just tell me. I'm not gonna bust your balls." And I'm like, "I'm painting." He's like, "Oh, he's like, yeah, I do that too." And I'm like, "Oh shit, all right." But for me to be like, in my adult years, I'm gonna go paint, and I'm sure some people are judging me right now that know me. Yes, I paint. But I had to really go through everything to figure out what worked, how to cope with that,
You have to try different things to see what works.
to help, to pull you out of it.
All right. If you're watching this and you're connecting with this and you're identifying and relating, chances are you're going to be hard pressed to go out and get a journal and do some journaling. You may not be ready to pick up a phone and call a therapist. You may not be willing to engage with any of us. What can you do? One thing that keeps coming back to mind when discussing the depression is the word despair. And I was going to a minute ago give my own little definition, but I really just need to just read the definition of despair: the complete loss or absence of hope. So if you're in that place, if you identify with that, I'm gonna give you a little pearl. Do something for someone who can't possibly do anything to repay you. When I was hearing like, oh, you know, you have no self-esteem, the road to esteem is through esteemable acts. I wish the first time I heard that, I wish I picked that up. I wish I did something. I wish I was helpful. I wish I was useful, because afterwards I would have said, holy shit, I was useful. I was helpful. I just helped someone. I just did something good.
There's so much power in that.
Yeah, it wasn't until maybe 9 years ago that just clicked in my mind, and now, it's in the toolbox. You know, if I'm feeling sorry about myself, and you know, the punitive voice is saying, what the fuck do you have to complain about, Jeff? You live in a house, you have a roof over your head, your friggin' neighborhood isn't shelled out. You know, there aren't people dying around you. Like, you have a really good life. What do you have to be depressed about? What do you have to be sad about? And that punitive voice just will friggin' slay me if I let it. But the best thing that I found to challenge that, you know, certain 12-step fellowships call it altruism. I don't think that's a word people use or will identify with on the airwaves here.
I'd be scared to Google it.
Yeah, so just doing something for somebody who can't do nothing for you.
Not being altruistic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. I mean,
if you're suffering from a chemical disorder based around dopamine and stuff like that, like,
You can't help it.
you can't help it. But if you start introducing some dopamine into your body through
right.
acts of service, acts of kindness, it's helped me. It's helped me.
Yeah.
It could be as simple as in your own family, coming out of your room and seeing what your mom's doing in the kitchen, what your dad's doing, and just asking a simple question like, so what's up? How's your day?
That goes a long way.
It does go a long way, because and I think that's a huge missing factor in a lot of families. A lot of families I deal with, people live in the same house, but they live like roommates.
Yep.
And everybody's got their own stuff going on, and everyone's spiraling in their own depression in separate rooms.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do the dishes tonight after that one.
You better.
Yeah, you better.
Yep.
You better do it before you're asked. You know, I say this all the time with clients I have that are young teenagers, that talk about the conflicts they have with their parents. And I'm like, well, what are the common things that you guys fight about that cause depression, that cause anger, that cause the conflict?
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually my room's a mess. It's usually I didn't do the dishes or take out the trash. There's like usually 3 to 5 things. And I said, if it's the reoccurring 3 to 5 things, if you beat them to the punch, if you took out the trash before they asked you to take it out, if you cleaned your room before they asked you to do it, not caring that, who cares if I make my bed? It's my bed. I'm going to get back in that bed anyway. No, that's not the point.
Get it out of your head.
Just take it off the list. That's one less thing for you guys to fight about. If you look at it from that lens of why would you give somebody who has a gun, why would you give them the bullets to shoot you? Right? So if there's no bullets, there's no threat. So take away those bullets, take away those issues that can become an issue.
Yeah.
And you'll find that you're going to find yourself being a closer member of the family, not a resident in that house.
What does that do for your depression?
Because it makes you feel connected. And I think a large part of depression is isolation and alienation. I think those are 2 common factors that you guys tell me right in the comments section. Am I right? You know, when we're depressed, we feel alone, and we feel that we can't communicate with others. We feel that we're lacking in that ability to do so. So if you're able to do simple, and I call them simple because, yeah, just do the dishes. Don't make a big deal out of it. You don't have to. I'm doing the dishes now. I'm going to make an announcement. Just shut up.
That's what I do.
Well, I mean, forget the comment section. I'll just tell you right here. I agree with that, but I also disagree, because some isolation, some alienation is okay, right? Like, you don't want to completely stay away from that.
No, I think isolation is great if you're reflective.
Isolation in this instance is the void of opportunity to be viewed as depressed. You know, that for me, a lot of times
You're isolating because of.
I don't want anyone to see me in this state. You know, it's like a self-preservation trying to protect my depression. You know, I don't want to do anything about it.
So maybe I was just answering from my place then, because I need to kind of take a day and have that pity party, go me, and fucking feel it. But then yes, introducing, getting back out into your family, into your friend groups and shit. I mean, how many times do you text me and I won't text all fucking day, and then you text me and then, or I'll text you and then it's like, oh no, I'm good. Because I'm not going to tell you when I'm in that fucking state.
Yeah.
I need to be in that state for a second and isolate before I introduce back. But I usually try to come back strong when I do.
But you were saying pity party, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll label it as reflection. So when you're having a pity party, right, but you're actively engaging with yourself at that time when you're isolating.
Right.
Now, if you're isolating because you feel that you're not being valued by other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm depressed because I don't feel loved by other members of my family. Therefore, I will isolate from them. I will avoid them.
Yeah, but you should just love yourself.
Well, should is a strong word. You know, we should do
true.
a lot of things. I should go to the gym.
Very true.
You know, I should do a lot of things.
Jeff, there's one thing all episode just gets hammered down. My God.
I should be able to tell someone they matter and they believe me.
Yes, exactly.
Stop hurting themselves.
Should is a strong word.
Sorry,
Cut that out.
I had to join the piling.
Oh, it's fine.
No, hey, look, I agree with you. We should be able to do a lot of things, right? But the fact of the matter is that we buy into how we're treated by others. And I've said this before in other episodes, our ego is huge. How we're perceived by others is how we want to be perceived by others. And if we're not perceived that way, right, that ties into shame, that ties into ego, and that ties into I'm not good enough. And when we buy into that, I think those elements create depression, and they lead into isolation. And that leads into other issues, unhealthy coping mechanisms that we discussed before, such as substance abuse, or such as rage.
My question, forgive me, I'm in a challenging mood tonight, but I want to understand, so I'm sure the people are having the same type of thoughts. So you're saying, in depressive state, going to isolation, but given this, this current topic, that's more depressed, but you're still doing what you should be doing. Or
this type of depression, right? Persistent depression disorder is supposed to be a lower level of depression than major depressive disorder. So major depressive disorder is like when you get hospitalized.
Sure. But so with this, you still, in theory, would go around to your family and
you can still function.
Yeah.
Right. You have the capability of doing so. It's hard. You're struggling through mud on a regular basis. Everything is effort. And you're looking at people around you and they're just skipping along.
It's like effortlessly.
Yeah. Everyone's able to do. I mean, if you're that kid in math class, for example, and you're just not getting a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and you're just like, what? Why are there letters on the... I used to do this in math class. I
doing that right now. What are you talking about?
I fucking hate math.
Guys.
I fucking hate math.
So I would be there in 10th grade, and I would look at the wall, and I would struggle with, why do they pick A, B, and C? Why isn't it L, M, Q? And I would miss the whole fucking lesson because I was obsessed with that. Meanwhile, everybody else is getting it, right? And I'm like, I'm not getting it, And I just took on the label of well, I'm not good at math. Oh, I suck. I'm a sucky student, And it wasn't that, but I bought into it. I bought into the labeling of, And so if you're labeled as the lazy person in the family, dad comes into the room and sees the three kids, and says, looks at the two older ones and says, hey, help me out with this. And the third one, the youngest one, wants to help out. I'm like, dude, you can't do anything. Just stay here. But it's not delivered in the best way, Over time, they're going to believe that. And over time, they're not going to offer themselves to do any help. I'm simplifying it, but I'm illustrating the fact that when we hear something repeatedly about our character, about the judgment of our character, we will buy into that judgment and we will infuse that into our psyche. right?
Yeah.
And as we do that, and as we're growing up, and we realize I don't like being like this at whatever point in your life. Like, you hit it, and you have those conversations in your head with the different elements of your personalities, and you're challenging them. Like when you're saying you're in your war room with the different characters,
Yep.
you're challenging those personalities. You're challenging those voices that are holding you back.
Yeah.
Right. So that's you deciding that, yeah, I'm done with you. I'm done with this. I got to do something and move forward. And these strategies are very personal. Like journaling works for you, but being empathetic and helping people and being involved in a community event, is amazing.
I don't want to do that. I'm not doing it for self gratification. It's something happens when I observe myself being useful. I don't know.
It's like selfishly being selfless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can get you into it, and you might move into going to an AA meeting because you want to hear other people's stories. But that act of belonging to a group is important. That act of even listening to a podcast of something you could relate to is a step in the right direction.
I'm glad you picked that particular 12-step fellowship out, or any 12. You mentioned a 12-step fellowship. Attending the meeting, absolutely, you gain a good feeling. You gain maybe a different outlook on some things. It's a very positive experience, but that is not the treatment that 12-step fellowship is offering to the attendee. It's actually just a place to come and find out about the treatment, and the treatment is the actual mechanics and labor of the 12-step process, which goes back to like the 1930s, and it's not something that is really like palatable to most people. It's like cumbersome and odd and awkward or whatever, to go through these exercises with another person that you don't really know too well up to that point of your life. And it's, what I'm kind of dancing around and getting at is, these suggestions are great that we're dishing out, and if you do them a little bit and you get some relief from it, great. You're on your way. But there is a much bigger overhaul or a much bigger cataloging of like what's going on with you that needs to take place, and you need to let somebody professional help you with that at some point. That's just my standpoint from where I come from.
Yeah, having an objective voice and give you feedback, as to where you are, and looking at your decision-making process matters. Because when you're in the center of the storm and you're blinded by what's going on around you, and you're the only person you have to help you navigate yourself out of the storm, not that helpful.
No.
And I've said this before, like, it doesn't have to be a therapist. It just needs to be somebody you trust to start with. A good friend of yours, your spouse, your partner, a colleague that you trust. But that's the beginning. Going to that meeting, right, it's not the be-all, end-all, but the act of going to the meeting and making yourself vulnerable is the first step. And being vulnerable does check that ego, our fragility, whether we're conscious of it or not. But saying that we're going to make change and we're going to start journaling is addressing, I think, our ego.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Action. Any action.
Any type of action is better than nothing.
Right. Because if you give into it, okay, well, there you are, and that's your life.
I'm big on that. Do something, even if it's the wrong thing.
Dude, just take your dog and go for a walk.
And that might not help you, but you did something. Body motion stays in motion. You know what I want to know?
What?
Just based off of general consensus, you are very valued on the show. I want to hear your take on all this because we've definitely shared. So what does Jess have to say?
So I completely understand like the persistent depressive disorder. Is that the right way to say it? Okay, good.
There you go.
I wasn't going to attempt that.
What?
I wasn't going to attempt that.
But for me,
known as dysthymia.
I have major depressive disorder, so I can only justify it through that lens.
Yep.
Because I have struggled with depression. Well, that major depressive disorder didn't come on up until my adult life. So like growing up as a kid, as a teenager, I've witnessed depression my whole life. My mom was a very depressed person. She has major depressive disorder as well. So when I was younger, watching her, sleep all weekend, kind of just not be able to kind of get herself out of bed to do anything.
Right.
So that kind of put that in my head at a very young age. So where my lack of motivation and lack of oomph for life started at a young age. So being able to be where I am today, being raised like that and kind of, always having that mindset, it's very hard to kick. But until I joined the program, I didn't know how to kick that until I learned better ways to kind of cope with certain things and how to motivate myself and to, start journaling or to pick the right coping skills. So for me, I see it from both lenses, but it's just depression sucks.
Yeah. It sucks. But I'm bringing this back to I'm envisioning you as a young child watching your mother struggle with her depression, and
It sucked. I was always like, I just always truly felt so awful for my mom because it was like, how come I can't help her?
right.
Like I always wanted to help her get out of that state, but nothing that anybody did besides what she could do for herself. So,
But I want to bring this back to the cultural component. There are a lot of families I grew up with that I would go into like a typical, I'm going to say typical white American kid's house, right? And they would shoot the shit with their mom and dad, joke around, whatever, And then I would go to my Chinese friend's house or another Indian household, and the
there was
relationship.
no messing around.
That's not always, but it was understood that, like if the dad wasn't very communicative,
Mm-hmm.
was very business-like, it was totally accepted. It wasn't like, "Oh, what's up with you? You're not gonna ask me about my day?"
Yeah.
You know? And the houses that I did go to, Asian households, where they had that same relationship, like the American kid, it did stand out. Like, oh, well, these guys are really Americanized. These guys are very Western-minded. They stood out.
Yeah.
Because they would ask their kids how their day was, and they would want to know emotionally where they were, and have that connection. But generally speaking, you had roles to fulfill, and that wasn't seen as depression, and that wasn't seen as dysfunctional. So I think that when we look at certain disorders, we have to take into mind cultural context.
I want to interrupt that real quick, Mahesh, because look, and thank you everybody who's been following along and sharing and supporting. This has been a great outcome so far. We're going to be looking as we move into the next season of this, of bringing people onto the show to discuss. We're not going to sit here, like I said last time, it's not Webster's Dictionary with the help of our dear friend Mahesh, who is a professional, just throwing shit at you. That's not what this is. We're just establishing kind of a baseline here of who we are, what we're about, and kind of the way we look at things. But to bring people on, and I want to get into that multicultural. I mean, everybody and anybody can have a seat at this table. So I guess I'll kind of preemptively make that announcement here that, we're going to be looking for people to come on and share your story, your perspective, your real raw version. So I love that you're talking about the cultural differences here.
Yeah, I mean, here we are living in America, and here we are interacting with people, not just with different socioeconomic statuses, on a daily basis, but we have different faiths, we have different cultures, we have different identities, and that's causing a lot of conflict for some people, if somebody defines themselves as male or female, gay, bi, trans, and that's a hot topic.
And this affects everybody.
This affects everybody.
But like you were saying, at different levels, and I don't know why it's just resonating with me, in that regard now. But there was a town that I lived in housing, and I was the token white kid.
Yeah.
That's I joke and say it's where I got my flavor from. But seriously. Like the depression, I shouldn't say depression. I don't know that I was depressed at that age, but my hardships, my hard times were a lot different, even though socioeconomically I was the same as them and vice versa.
Mhm.
But I remember going into their house and seeing how their parents or lack of parents interacted versus mine. Mine were nuts. They'd like beat the fuck out of each other, and it was just crazy. And over there wasn't as much that. There were other things, you know,
Yep.
cheating, it's different things. So
Yeah,
it was,
disrespect.
right. So,
Yeah.
but we can both say we're depressed,
Right.
but how and why?
Exactly.
Wow, that's very
It's
broad.
the construct of that family, right? It's the construct of that person in that family. Like, and I said this earlier, like if Jeff said, I'm depressed because of X, Y, and Z, you know, I have to be like, are you serious? You know? I had a big learning curve, I'll be honest, once I started working in the town that I'm working in. It's a highly affluent town, right? And I live in a very middle class neighborhood. I grew up in Queens in Long Island, you know, but even when I was living in Long Island and I was surrounded by like a lot of rich kids, you know, yeah, my parents did well, but I didn't have any pocket money, you know. So for me to ask my dad for like $5 or $10 so we can go to the mall and I can buy an album, he's like, why? Why do you need? I'll take you. I'm like, no, I want to go with my friends. Why? Who are you going with? You know, it's like this grill.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God.
You know,
I know that.
because it was like this lack of trust.
Yes.
Whatever. I'm going down a different road, but it was just different. Even though I lived with a lot of rich kids.
That should be an episode, by the way. Cultural differences.
Oh yeah.
I thought we were gonna talk about $5 albums.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to talk about Wham, walking around money.
Wham.
Around money.
Yeah, you said you didn't have any Wham. No, we're all out of that
Are
Wham.
you kidding me?
Wham was gone.
No, there's no wham in my family.
See,
There's
everybody.
no wham with the back of the hand. That's the only wham I got. But
Same here.
you know, but so here I am working in this community where I have students that would I had a kid physically curl up on the floor, have a complete breakdown, and I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? Right? The root of it was that their parents took their phone away and they did not have their phone with them for the day. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And I had to check myself and learn how to be empathetic. I'm like, this is this kid's struggle.
This is his
You know, I
despair.
Yeah, I can't, crap all over it and say, come on, Johnny, suck it up. Get up. You know, you got to meet them where they are. And I got to play my role and be supportive. But I can't let go of the fact that I'm like, dude, are you serious right now?
That's kind of part of our podcast here from, where it was in my hat when we started talking about this.
Yeah.
Was opening up dialogue like this, having the conversation, putting that out there, because what you're saying is probably going to resonate. I hope what I'm about to say resonates, because it kind of puts a bow on everything that we're saying here. I developed this mindset around things like that. People, the kid flipping out and curling up and crying because his mom did not get him the correct Canada Goose.
Canadian Goose.
Canadian Goose. Oh my God. Yeah.
As you can see, I don't spend $1,000 on jackets. But so to the point though, like, he's losing his mind because of that. There are kids that I know personally that have been homeless at a young age.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And they feel the same way. So the mindset that I developed when I look at people, like when I share stories of my past, people are like, well, I don't want to tell you, about mine because it's nowhere near as bad as that. And I'm like, nope, that's not what we're doing.
Right.
So I want to offer up here to put a bow on that is everybody has their internal gauge.
Yes.
For Mahesh, it's whatever it may be. You don't really let us in too much, but whatever your true trigger is to get you there is literally the same as that kid who cannot text his friends and Snapchat him and shit and whatever the hell these kids are doing in high school, middle school.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Your gauges, if you look at those, take all the other shit, all the other stuff away.
Yeah.
They're maxed out.
Oh yeah.
So that's something as humans. I mean, I'm not the fucking spokesman, but like, we need to look at other people, and it's like, you're feeling how I'm feeling. It doesn't matter how we got to that.
Right. Yeah. But the result of those feelings, there are commonalities, such as the isolation, such as the self-deprecation, such as I'm not I have no self-worth.
Mm.
So those products of our depression, forget about what got you to feel depressed.
Mhm.
Okay, and that's very judgmental. Again, judgment of others on you
Yep.
contributes to your depression.
Yep.
Right? So let's just start with the given. You're depressed.
Yep.
Right? You're dealing with depression. The after effects of it, what is that? What is the residue that it leaves behind?
Mm.
We're not isolating depression as its own singular disorder, because a result of dealing with any disorder can lead to other disorders. So my depression can lead into an eating disorder.
Mm.
My depression can lead into a substance abuse disorder. Right? So it's something that's it's a fluid issue, and that's a very individualized element that we all have to struggle with. Just because you have depression and I have depression doesn't mean that both of us are going to end up using heroin.
Right.
Your depression is going to be different than my depression. Your depression might be around family issues.
Mm.
My depression might be around homelessness.
Could be around your weight, and you gravitate to an eating disorder. You end up with an eating disorder
Right.
to try to regulate it in whatever direction you want it to be in.
Yeah, my depression may be around being physically abused or feeling alienated in my high school because I don't have any friends, right?
Would you call that trauma-based depression or trauma-formed depression? Or
Well, the trauma is a specific event, right, that causes you to be totally off scale from your daily functioning.
the beating or the bullying or
Yeah.
So they turn into comorbidities.
Yes.
Mm.
Right. Yeah, they become comorbid because one feeds into the next.
Right.
So you could be dual diagnosed, right? And have to deal with several issues at the same time. So you might be bipolar and still deal with your substance abuse issues and your depression and your anxiety because they feed into each other.
what do you deal with first, or how do you kind of prioritize what you deal with, or
I don't know, man. That's such a general it's such a vague question because what are the circumstances I'm dealing with?
Well, Jeff, if you're a doctor and somebody comes into your ER doctor, somebody comes in with, a laceration in their face and a broken knee, which one are you going to go at first? You're probably going to go at the one that's
leaking blood.
Yeah, right. The
Life
present. Correct. That's my take on it.
Yeah. I mean, in the moment, if I'm picked up for DUI by a state trooper, and I'm thrown in jail, the first thing they're going to do is sober me up.
Right. They're not going to take you right to court. Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So there are stages in dealing with things. Then there's the assessment. Then in that assessment, that clinical assessment, it's like, are you grounded? Are you in reality? Or are you detached from reality? And there are assessments that are done. Are you suicidal? Are you in danger? Are you a danger to yourself? Are you a danger to other people? So those high-level crisis questions are usually asked right away, right? And from there, we look at history. We look at your physical, right? And if you have a proper assessment and you go through a neurological evaluation, hopefully, and that, again, is a privilege. Not everybody has access to their health insurance to have a neuropsych evaluation. The waiting list to have a neuropsych evaluation is like 6 months to a year.
Yeah, it is. I just had one done last August.
So there are people out there that don't have health insurance, that don't have a clue, first of all, as to how to go about addressing
And they're like
issues.
$8,000
Oh, they're
if you
insane.
don't have insurance.
Can you imagine? Right?
Just to get diagnosed.
Imagine yourself living.
Wild.
But that's invaluable to finally get diagnosed with.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But
Just to get answers in general is
Right.
like such a great feeling.
Yeah. But can you imagine yourself living in a state of depression where if you're living in housing and you're living in a situation where you're depending on check to check from the state, right? And food stamps, and your health insurance sucks if you have any. And you start telling yourself, yeah, I want to do something about my life. I want to start getting some help.
Mm.
And everywhere you go to get help, You don't have access to these things. And you hear about these things. You hear about these evaluations, and you hear about, maybe I should get my kid tested for ADHD to start with, but I can't afford the medication.
Right.
And the medication is very expensive.
Yes. It's insane.
Mhm.
So how do you keep up the fight? How do you keep up this, how do you struggle still to help yourself or help the ones you love?
I'd say that's probably a pretty good way to start to wrap the episode up of, what do you do? Like you feel this way, or, if this is hitting you, I'll be honest, when Mahesh had brought this topic up to the rest of us, I started to think, wow, maybe I have this. Maybe this is something I've been dealing with, and without going through it all, like it made sense to me. So it's something I'm going to look into, and I hope this message hits a lot more than just me. But for you to kind of wrap this up, what can you offer up to everybody and to us? Because we're learning from you here too. How do you identify, and then what's your first play?
I think at some point we have to look at ourselves and say, am I happy? Because our level of depression is different from somebody else's level of depression. If I'm even going to call it depression, I might just call it that I'm just sad. I've been sad for most of my life. I've always felt very little of myself throughout most of my life, and I don't want to feel like that anymore. And if you're at that stage where you start questioning yourself, you might want to question, well, what do I want to change about my life? And you start there.
What's missing?
Yeah, what's missing, and what can I do? Why am I afraid to challenge myself? Why am I afraid to go back to school? Why am I afraid to apply for that other position that I know I can do? Why do I believe other people when they call me a loser? Why do I believe my family when they say that I have no ambition? Why do I believe that? And if you can be honest with yourself and set aside your ego and be vulnerable to yourself and start asking yourself these questions, that's the beginning stages of addressing your mental health. And I've said this before, this is not easy. This is painful, and it's a journey. It takes a long time for some people to get through that process. Other people might be very honest and say, I got to get some help, and I need to engage in society. I need to get out of the house. I want to redefine who I am. I want to be happy. And
Here's a hot take, Mahesh. If you're at home and you're watching this and you're question, you're at the point where you're like, I think I might, or I don't know. She said I have a problem, but I don't really know if I do. Like, I'm probably going to catch shit for this, but in my industry, if you're one of these people and you're sitting at home, Google addiction treatment near me, or Google depression treatment near me, Google anxiety, depression, whatever your issue is, Google it. Go to Google, and on the top of your screen, there's going to be a bunch of options, bunch of companies. Call them up. Tell them about what's going. Someone's going to answer the phone like me.
Yep.
Tell them about what's going on with you. Ask them if you can do an assessment.
Yeah, they do free screenings.
And here's the thing.
Most organizations out there.
Hold on. I was just about to land the plane. I know I struggle with that. But here's the thing. If you go through that assessment and they don't follow up with you, there's nothing wrong with you. You're good. Take care. Have a good one. Now, if you take that assessment and they start calling you every day, hey, are you going to do something about this? I think that's an indication that there might be an underlying issue there that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wasn't calling perfectly healthy, normal people back, asking them to come check out, a treatment option that they had called in to inquire about. If they're not a good fit, then, that's a pretty good indicator to me.
If you're not able to get in the car and go to your appointment, or turn your computer on and log in for that virtual session, there is a level of self-accountability,
Well, you have to show up.
Yeah, you got to show up, you got to participate, and you got to dig in deep when people ask you basic questions, as to, it's an interactive sport, right? It's a contact sport. Life is a contact sport. Life is going to knock you on your butt. Get up, get back in the game, So, hey, listen, I appreciate you guys tuning in, and watching our show. We will be bringing guests on to share their stories, and we're looking forward to that. And if you would like to share your story with us, please drop us a statement in the comment link. Please reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you. Thank you.
Peace.